When Peter Venkman, Reynolds Stantz, Egon Spengler lose their job as scientist, they start a new job, that of ghostbusting, to fight the evil ghosts that lurk across New York City. Released in the UK on the 7th of December 1984, this film dominated the box office. $295.2 million this movie made. It's now considered to be a classic. There have been a sequel, numerous reboots, but there's nothing like the original. Based on his own fascination with ghosts, the supernatural, Dan Aykroyd conceived Ghostbusters, a project starring himself and John Belushi, in which they would venture through time and space, battling supernatural forces. Sadly, Belushi's death in 1982, the concept was deemed financially impractical. The late great Harold Ramis was hired to help rewrite the script, set it in New York, and make it more realistic. It was the first comedy film to employ expensive special effects, and Columbia Pictures, concerned about its then ridiculously low budget of 25 to 30 million, had little faith in its box office potential. But upon its release and to critical acclaim, this film became one of those rare things. It was lightning in a bottle, a cultural phenomenon. The second highest grossing film of 1984 in the US and Canada, and then the highest grossing comedy of all time. And I said it before, busting makes me feel good.
I'm sure it does. As well as being like highest, like you've said, the grossing figures there, it's worth noting that isn't this also Columbia Pictures' highest grossing film of all time if you adjust for inflation? It's their
yeah, of course. Well pointed out.
I remember when this came out, 1984 would have made me 11 years old. But this was another one of those films that the US got in the early summer. They got it in June, and we had to wait until the back end of the year. So by the time it came out here, you couldn't avoid Ghostbusters hysteria. We had heard of this new film, Ghostbusters, that people were getting excited about. We had seen the logo everywhere. There was magazines that were covering it left, right, and centre all the way through the back end of the year. And so it was one of those films that even before you went into it, you already knew pretty much everything about it. And you probably owned a few of the toys at the same time, because I know I did. I already owned some of the merchandise before I saw this film. The hype was so huge by the time it got to the UK that going to see this at the cinema was a massive experience. And then to just not be disappointed by it and just blown away, and then going home and wanting to watch it again. I think this is a film that I saw a few times at the cinema, even at an early age, because I wanted to see it again on the big screen. Everything about it was just, it was so visually superb, funny. And, you were reenacting in the playground scenes from the film because you were just caught up in the whole hysteria around it. It's hard to get that kind of hysteria these days because of the internet age. All the way through productions, we know elements of the films. But back in the 80s, you didn't have the internet. So you had to rely on magazines. You had to rely on behind-the-scenes specials on TV to get anything. And so you'd clamour for every bit of information, and you would always only get the positive boosting information. You would never get, like we get these days, people criticising, mocking, dragging things down. And this is the film of the 80s that really caught my attention for that hysteria fact, for that whole I want to be a part of this world fact. I adore this film. Rewatching it this week, I rewatched all the Ghostbusters films except for that 2016 film this week in preparation for the deep dive. And that first film is still a film that holds up so well. Yes, the groundbreaking effects work of the time does look a little cheap at times now because we are so used to a lot more polished, but it still all works. It still all works perfectly. And why does it work? It works because of that cast. And because they had a script that they very rarely stuck to, they improvised on set and used their own personalities and characters and their friendships to convey this story of three friends who basically join together to bust ghosts. I mean, the stories are out there, and you'll have heard them all about how Bill Murray didn't really sign on to the last minute, and even on the first day of shooting, they didn't know if he was going to turn up, and then he was very unpredictable on set because he'd just come out with random lines. But it kind of works. He ad-libbed so much, and you can see it when you rewatch it. If you look carefully, you can see the moments where he clearly ad-libbed something or threw in a response that the cast weren't ready for. And particularly Harold Ramis, who had made the decision to not smile through this whole film. He wanted his character to be so serious and never smiles. But there's a few moments that you can see him desperately trying to fight back from chuckling at his friend pulling off some crazy antics in front of him that weren't scripted.
As I said before, Dan Aykroyd is famously fascinated with his belief in the paranormal. He was also interested in the idea of the comedic ghost of the mid-20th century, such films as the Abbott and Costello movies, Bob Hope's, and well worth watching if you ever find it, the Ghost Breakers, the Bowery Boys, Ghost Chasers. He wrote the script intending to star alongside Eddie Murphy and his close friend and fellow blues brother, John Belushi. He then turned to former Saturday Night Live castmate Bill Murray, who agreed to the job with again an explicit agreement, which is how we often work. Aykroyd pitched the concept of the three guys who chase ghosts, including a sketch of the Marshmallow Man that he created. And he likened the Ghostbusters to pest control workers, saying, calling a Ghostbuster is like getting vermin removed. Aykroyd believed that Ivan Reitman was the logical choice. He produced Animal House, and he'd worked with Murray and Ramis on the classic Stripes. The original intention was to be a bit more scary, a little bit more serious, but with a cast like that, there's only one route that can really go. I've read a few early versions of the script, and it was a blueprint for the film rather than the finished film. As you said, Andy, there was lots and lots of lines that were ad-libbed, and some of the classic lines were ad-libbed that we all remember. But it was lightning in a bottle. It was one of those films that, against all odds, it just worked. The dynamics of those actors, and let's not forget Sigourney Weaver, who just brought absolute class to the movie. For the time, outstanding special effects and the iconic Marshmallow Man. Everything about this film fits together perfectly.
With regards to the cast as well, we need to mention the great Rick Moranis as Louis Tully. Again, someone who improvised. There's the scene when he's got the party going on and he's mingling with his party guests and like commenting on the price of salmon in the different markets and things like that. Apparently the whole thing, which was a continuous shot, was almost entirely improvised by Moranis himself on the spot. And he just had a perfect flow to everything. Moranis, this is Moranis doing what he does best. That awkward, nerdy, nervous character who's like trying to woo the ladies, but not realizing that no one's really interested. But he's immensely likable. This is a film that was, I think it's proper lightning in a bottle. That everything came together for utter perfection. That they've tried to replicate, like you said, in the follow-up films, but never really managed to strike that, because the follow-up films, even Ghostbusters 2, I've got a bit of love for, but rewatching it this week, hasn't aged well, and it feels that it needs to reference the first film more than be a film on its own.
Yeah,
and that's where the franchise has kind of suffered. Yeah, it's got some great moments.
It's a bit like Jurassic Park. The first film was absolutely perfect, and everything that has been done subsequently just doesn't have the charm of that first movie. There was some interesting casting ideas very early on when they couldn't secure Murray's commitment. Michael Keaton, Chevy Chase, Tom Hanks, Robin Williams, Steve Guttenberg, and even Richard Pryor were considered for that role. Keaton was considered alongside Jeff Goldblum to portray Egan. It's been said that Gregory Hines and Reginald Vell Johnson were considered for the part that eventually ended up as Ernie Hudson's Winston Zedmore. John Candy was offered the role of Louis Tully. Other actresses were never really considered, even though there'd been a huge amount of auditions for the role of Dana Barrett. But Sigourney Weaver attracted the filmmaker's attention. She was used to doing more serious roles, Alien, The Year of Living Dangerously. She revealed that she was fantastic at comedy.
You hear all those names and you think, well, that could have been interesting. But then you realise that, Bill Murray's nonchalant charm is perfect for the character that he plays in this. And you can't quite see anyone else being the same. Because Bill Murray is very much that nonchalant character in real life, as we've seen from multiple interviews. And it works great. But when he gets excited, he becomes almost laddish and childish. There's the shots when Sigourney Weaver's character, Dana, first walks in to the firehouse and goes up to the desk and is talking to Janine. And he's sat in the background. And watching it this week, it made me absolutely rupture with laughter at the way that he just suddenly springs up to his feet with a look of like, oh, there's a female in the building, and then leaps across to go and talk to her. And I'd never really noticed the way that he just leaps straight up before. I always remember him like leaping over the barrier between his partition office. But the way that he springs from his desk is hilarious. And I just can't see anyone else pulling off that kind of like flip of character from like, I'm just going to be back here basically sleeping, to alert and awake because there's a female in his presence. All the cast are perfectly placed because Dan Aykroyd, you see him in interviews, he is that character in real life. Harold Ramis, you saw him in interviews, he was Egon Spengler in real life. They were perfect for each of their roles, and any of the other casting choices would have changed the balance. Ernie Hudson joined the cast late on because Eddie Murphy had refused and declined, and they redrafted the script to remove that character for the chunk of the film until they could secure someone to enter into it. And that's why he doesn't get a lot to do in this first film. He does get more to do in the sequels, and he's become quite beloved as one of the core Ghostbusters over the years. It's just a shame that we didn't get to see him utilised as part of the four friends at the beginning. He was only added in later on.
Interestingly enough, he became a regular character on the cartoon series spin-off, The Real Ghostbusters. And that cemented Winston more as one of the Ghostbusters than the actual films did. It also gave us the name Slimer. The film never referenced Slimer having an identity until you got to the cartoon. Hey, and the cartoon was great. The film was a landmark movie. As we said, one of those times where everything works perfectly. We got Ghostbusters 2, which was a disappointment. Some good ideas, never really gelled. It sort of didn't know what it wanted to do. It referenced lots of elements from the first film and just didn't really come together. There was always talk of a Ghostbusters 3, but that never happened because you couldn't get the gang all together. And then we had the reboot in 2016, was it?
2016, yeah.
In 2016, and that went down incredibly badly, where we had a group of female Ghostbusters. I watched this for the first time a couple of years ago, missed it on the big screen. And I think, while it's not great, it gets a lot of negative reviews, and I put that down to the fact that it had a female cast. Now, I think it should have been much more of a sequel as opposed to sort of a reinvention, and I think that would have worked better. And then you could have had Bill Murray doing what Bill Murray does rather than this odd character who pops up and dies very, very quickly. But I didn't hate it. Just thought it was okay.
My problem with it is basically I don't like Paul Feig's films.
Yeah,
I never understood the fascination people had with Bridesmaids. I thought that was okay. Yeah, every Paul Feig film has just made me just go, it's not my comedy. But I will say the Ghostbusters 2016, Chris Hemsworth, fantastic.
Yeah.
And Kate McKinnon is marvelous in it. I absolutely adore McKinnon. She's I mean, she always brings that quirky energy to anything she does anyway, and she's perfect in that film. It's more for whilst something's going on front of screen, she's in the background. Watch her; she's hilarious. She's reacting to things in the background brilliantly. But the rest of the film just doesn't quite gel for me because it's a typical Paul Feig comedy. With regards to the franchise as a whole, I mean, it's spun off into merchandise, like I've mentioned. You could buy proton packs, you can buy Slimers. I've got various collectible figures from the franchise scattered around the house. There was also the video game series. Now, there was the one in the 80s that it's not a great game, but boy, I replayed it last year on the ZX Spectrum, and I just fell into it again. It's just simple, it's fun, but in more recent decades, there was what was intended to be Ghostbusters 3 script kind of evolved into a Ghostbusters video game, and it's well worth playing. You're a new Ghostbuster recruited, working alongside the originals.
I did. I played that. I did it on the. I did it as a Wii game,
and
it
it's
was really
such a good game. Yeah, and there's been other video games. There's been top-down like action blaster games based on Ghostbusters, and there's also been the VR game that has been recently released, which I need to pick up because I want to bust ghosts. And that's the lasting legacy of this film, is that once you've watched the original Ghostbusters, you so want to have a proton pack with a wand in your hand and go round busting ghosts, because let's be honest, busting makes you feel good.
Yeah, Ghostbusters Afterlife came out in 2021, directed by Reitman's son Jason, and we're going to be talking about it in our reviews. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. It's not dead, folks. For a movie about ghosts, it's not dead. I just want to mention the song for personal reasons. Basically, it stayed in the top 100, in the number one position in the US for 3 weeks. And the plot line to it was by my dear friend, Keith Williams. Yeah, he wrote the script for the Ghostbusters video, and that video is almost as iconic as the film. In the post-Pulp Fiction Reservoir Dogs world of Quentin Tarantino, England finally had a go with Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. A story of a heist involving a very confident young card sharp who loses £500,000 to a powerful local mobster, Hatchet Harry. Eddie, who decides, along with his 4 friends, to choose a crooked path to clear the debt and, most importantly, to save themselves. Produced by Matthew Vaughn before he became a director, this had an ensemble cast of up-and-coming young actors, including Jason Fleming, Dexter Fletcher, who went on to be a director himself, Nick Moran, Steve McIntosh, and an appearance by Sting, alongside Vinnie Jones, and in his first major screen role, the Statham himself, Jason Statham. Now, I'm going to put my cards on the table, because for some reason, this film never sat right with me. And we're going to discuss why. But it was that, in the way that Reservoir Dogs showed villains being human beings, but they were still despicable, this showed despicable people being charming human beings. Now, I know the crime thrillers have done that before. Let's look at The Italian Job. But for some reason, this film I always found a little bit odious. As I revisited it, has my opinion changed? But over to you, Andy.
1998 this came out, so yeah. I was in my mid-20s when this came out, and I think I was the perfect age for it. I was so ready for this kind of film to come out of the British film industry, and costing only 800,000 to make and cracking 24 million at the box office was a great success that put Guy Ritchie on the map, not just for me, but for the worldwide audiences. I know some people will argue that Snatch was the one that really cemented him stylistically and internationally, but this, every calling card that he has, every one of his tropes that he throws into his films, every part of like the way he structures his films was all here in this very first film outing that he put together, and it captured me right from the start. And it's the opening scene of it, where it's Eddie and what's Statham's character called? Bacon. Eddie and Bacon selling moody goods on the streets with a little scam. And then it's got the 100 Mile City by Ocean Colour scene starting up in the background. And then it does what Guy Ritchie is so great at doing. Introduces the characters via music and stylistic shooting and slow motion footage. So by the first 15 minutes, you kind of know every character, if only by the tone of that character from the music that's been placed with it. And then it kind of seems that for the first act, none of these characters are actually linked together. You've got Eddie and his mates who are just planning to win big at the cards, like getting onto the high stakes poker table at Hatchet Harry's. You've got some you've got a gang of thugs who live next door who just rob from everyone. You've got the drug empire, which is run by 4 posh public school boys who are clearly out of their depth in what they're doing, but are making the best stuff. Everyone's stories seem like completely separate. But then in the second act, everything starts to clash together until you get to the final act where it all weaves perfectly around. And it's how Ritchie has styled most of his films, particularly his gangster-related ones. This world is something that Ritchie is best at doing. Whenever he's branched off, aside from Sherlock Holmes, which worked, whenever he's branched off to do something a little different, he's never quite captured the same kind of energy. But in recent years, he's realised this, and we've got the Gentleman TV series, which feels very similar to this. And he plays it all so well, because you will watch this and Snatch as well. You will watch that first half thinking, well, how are these all linked? But then when it comes together, it makes the revisiting it a lot more engaging, because you start to see the little pieces getting put into play once you know in hindsight how it all plays out. I loved this film when it came out. And it's a film that I've been back to many times. And it's a film that I've bought many times. I have 2 versions of this on VHS. Because
there was a director's cut, wasn't there?
Yes. I got the standard white edition, which was the original cut. And then there was the yellow box edition, which I got the box set one with the poker chips and the playing cards and like all. Remember when they used to do memorabilia give up like things?
Yeah.
As box sets?
Those were the days. Yeah. You can't get that with streaming.
They did them for me, who would pay that extra £40 just to get some junk. But this was one of the films that I was pleased to get that with. I have a lot of love for this, and I enjoyed rewatching this week, even though I'd only rewatched it about 4 months ago anyway. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to watch it again. And I was just caught up again in the lives of some pretty unlikable characters. But it's worth noting that Eddie and his mates kind of get drawn into this world without intending to. They just intended to get some money at a card game using his, underground card game, yes. But, they weren't major criminals. It's everyone around him who are the real criminals. And I know that you had a problem with, you didn't feel that they got the comeuppance, but the actual real criminals kind of do.
Yeah, and that's the issue with it. Look, hey, I love a good heist movie, as you know, and I love a good crime movie. And I think when we do crime movies in the UK, and I'm looking particularly at The Long Good Friday, we have a certain morality to it. And series like The Sopranos, you always knew that these very, very bad people who were doing very, very bad things, and you were charmed by them, but deep down you also wanted them to have some sort of moralistic resolution, and that never happens for me. And I don't want to overthink it. I think it is an incredibly confident directorial debut, and it's stylish, and it was doing something brand new with British film that hadn't been done for an awful long time, which was to take away from very static shots and very static shots at around the time when we're getting mainly costume dramas. And for that reason, I think it's worth the accolade. But I don't really care anything about the characters. They are ciphers in a plot, and that's how it all comes together. Yes, I like the freeze frames. I love the little jokey subtitles. I like the slow-mo and the speed-ups, which again we've seen many, many times in Guy Ritchie's movies. But it's sort of the exuberance of the exuberance and the energy of the film feels hollow. It's style over substance, and for that reason, I even going back to it quite recently, I still don't care about the characters and don't really like anybody in it, and therefore I'm there for the filmmaking audacity more than I am for the plot audacity.
Yeah, I can see that, because the characters are mostly caricatures.
Yeah,
They are stereotypes of a certain type of world, and this world's being the British crime world, and it's clearly drawn from, Ritchie's own personal love of, the craze kind of empires and things like that, and he's just drawing from the tropes. I mean, he even casts, and we'll talk about the cast, because this is a film in which it's more the cast that make the film for me, because they just have some fun on screen. Even if you don't care for the characters, I love watching these people play. There's 44 speaking parts in this film, and 17 of them were played by people who'd never acted before in their life. One of which was an actual underworld thug himself, and that's bare-knuckle boxer Lenny McLean, who was a notorious enforcer who worked with people such as the Krays over his life. And presences of someone like that on the set and involved in it is similar to how Scorsese, with his gangster ones, always has people who had connections to gangsters alongside him. And it kind of grounds it and makes it, it's comic booky, but almost connected and real in approach.
and I think it's that element that doesn't sit right for me, because it's almost celebrating people who do very, very horrific things. And that morality or lack of morality, I always found quite odious. Now, that was a period where laddism was on the rise, and gangsters were being celebrated almost in Robin Hood type terms, that they were geezers and they might have gone around shooting people's kneecaps off, but they were still chirpy Cockney characters. And I think that perforated my love of this film, or my like of this film, all the way through. Now, I think that some of the casting's great. I mean, to say that Jason Fleming, Dexter Fletcher, who I still miss from the screen, Nick Moran, and of course Statham in his first real screen outing, all did remarkable jobs and are very, very likable characters on screen. But I still can't get away from that level of morality. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but it always stood in the way of this film for me. I do prefer Snatch, but I also admire the fact that Ritchie made a film that didn't look like British films of that period, and it felt fresh and it felt visually exciting, and it felt like a great calling card for a career that he's now had. But I can't get over that slight dubious nature to what the story is purporting to say.
The film was dedicated to the memory of Lenny McLean, who passed away just before he got released. His one starring role on film, and for someone who's never acted, I think that he really had a presence as Barry the Baptist. He had a menace. He had an abhorrent nature to him that worked for the film. But also, you can't talk about the cast in this without mentioning Vinnie Jones, who was a notoriously thuggish footballer at the time. But he appeared as Big Chris in this film, and it opened him up a huge path into Hollywood. He became huge over that following decade. And on his first day of filming, not to say that he'd broken away from all his thuggish nature, he literally had only just been released from police custody because he had beaten up his neighbour on the first day of filming. So he's always had that presence. And
he has. And I'm going to tell you something. I directed, so my first music video was for Leeds United Football Club. And I had to enter the room with Vinnie Jones. In that room, and I've never felt so intimidated in my entire life.
He's in the role that is perfectly suited to him. And even in the more recent Gentleman TV series, when you see him pop up, and he's not a great actor, but he's got a good presence on screen. And he's one of those people who can get by just on how he looks and how he walks more than anything else. He could try his best at Shakespeare and he'd fail. But you wouldn't care, because the way I'd love to see him do Shakespeare, to be honest with you, because I think it'd be hilarious. But all around the cast, I find enjoyment in a lot of them. The inept criminals provide me amusement. The two Scousers, Gary and Dean, have me in hysterics. But you also have Alan Ford, who's got a small role but does provide the voiceover narration. He went on to make much more of an impact in Snatch, when he plays a rather vile character throughout. You've mentioned Sting. Sting got involved in it because his wife, Trudy Styler, found the screenplay in the 90s, read it, said it wasn't an easy read because it was very long, rambling screenplay with terrible typos and really poorly presented, but saw something in it, and so was instrumental in getting the film made. And it was through her getting in touch with Tom Cruise, who attended a screening of a rough cut of the film and loved it and raved about it, that it helped gain the traction to get it a distribution. So Sting was involved in it primarily through his wife, and he doesn't do much, but it's nice to see Sting pop up in a film.
Yeah.
I need to mention one aspect of this film, that it's one of those scenes in a film that it catches you unaware when you first watch it, but then it's so blatantly obvious on repeated viewings. And that's in the latter act of the film, when the wasted Gloria springs up from the sofa, grabs the Bren gun, and starts shooting up the room. And it catches you completely off guard, because she wasn't there. Where did she suddenly come up for? And the characters actually obviously responds like, where did she come from? When you rewatch this film, she's there all the way through that scene. Yeah. But you didn't notice it on the first viewing because her clothes are blending so perfectly in the sofa. And even an earlier scene with the gang in there, one of them almost sits on it and goes, "Oh, didn't see you there, love." So it was all signposted that was going to be a thing. And I love the fact that he caught you off guard. He played with the environment. He played with the colour palettes. He played with, he's given it that orangey, beige colour palette on many scenes to hide things in plain view. And it just showed the skill that Ritchie had for style at such an early part of his career. And I don't think he's really advanced his style any further. I think he's still this style of director.
Yeah.
But that's because he nailed it with this and Snatch right at the early part of his career. Why try to develop it any further? When he's tried to grow in different directions, it's not worked. Ritchie makes these kind of films, and he makes these the best that he can do.
The film was released in August of 1998 and was the second highest UK production of that year, behind Sliding Doors. It did okay in America. It didn't really set the world alight, but it did set Ritchie's career. It did set Ritchie's career on the path to much bigger work. So he followed it up with Snatch. There was a Lock, Stock TV series, which he wrote. There was always talk of a sequel, but that never happened. And some of the ideas evolved into the TV series. Ritchie works best for me in the crime genre, apart from the Sherlock Holmes movies, of course. I'm not a huge fan of his, but I think he is an important British directing voice because he has such a unique visual style that comes across in all of his films. And he has a confidence, you might even say an arrogance, with the way that he directs. And that makes him, alongside other British directors, contemporary British directors, an absolute powerful voice in British filmmaking.
Yeah.